So stay close. This play on the inside, this play on the outside. We got it all covered.
I don't want no part of what you do no more. You hear me? So you can just leave me the fuck out of that. Whatever it is.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you are. Hello, welcome to Caught on the Wire. You're here today joining me and Alex Cottrell as always for some analysis on episode 4 of season 2, Hard Cases. How are you doing today, Alex?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm enjoying your unique opening that you got going on there. I think that's a good way to open.
Inclusive
very,
opening.
Very welcoming.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Excellent. Yeah, well, we've got a few people to welcome. I guess we're quite happy, aren't we? Because our podcast seems to be picking up. We've got some ratings on iTunes now. We've had a few listener emails come in, so we're of course going to read those out for you before we kick things off today. And I'll hand over to Alex for that bit, who's been looking at our inbox recently. So.
Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on the inbox and seeing everything that's been coming in. And it's nice because it really, I mean, we've spent hours and hours recording this. Like each episode is like an hour and a half or so. And we're into season 2 now. So we spent a lot of time on it and really makes it worth it when you guys sort of get involved in the discussion. So as we said last week, even if it's to say that we're totally and utterly wrong, please do, because it just makes it worthwhile, you know?
Yeah.
So let's start off. With an email, and this is for a guy. This is from a guy called Sean, who contacted us to say that he's enjoying the show, and says, "I have a friend who is a policeman, and I believe pension for police isn't the same as retirement, which is based on age. Police only need a certain amount of years served to get a full pension. That is why some can get it early enough and still become security guards and still work to earn extra money." So I think clearing up something we were talking about in episode 2, where McNulty, we were kind of guessing his age when he said that he only had 11 more years.
That's it, yeah. And I guess because we're in Britain, I think everyone over here kind of has a blanket retirement age around mid-60s. So we couldn't quite imagine McNulty being close to that age quite yet. So it did confuse us a little bit, but thanks for clearing that up, Sean. It's exactly what we want from our feedback, really. Just enriching our knowledge. So.
Yeah, and just good to kind of pick up on things that we did a little while back. And we'll pick up on an email from Damon as well. I exchanged a couple of emails with Damon. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to read all of it out. But he does have a few interesting tidbits to share. He says that Damon says that he's from Baltimore. He says, "I have been to maybe all the places on the show," which is pretty impressive because I definitely want to go to Baltimore at some point if I get the chance, see the place. He said, "I noticed last season when you were trying to find out what Ed Norris had gotten locked up for, his story is very similar to the Clay Davis case in season 4/5, a, inverted commas, loan from a parent that wasn't actually a loan." So we mentioned, because we were saying that Ed Norris had some legal troubles at one point. That was way back in season 1. That's like...
Oh, yeah.
Early episode.
We might have to steal the thunder here from Tom, who I'm sure would love to tell you this when he comes back on the show, assuming he does. But I think he went to Baltimore, didn't he, a couple of years ago, and he managed to get a kind of personal guided tour from a resident just around all the wire locations. And she had some, I think she was called Zippy. I mean, it's a great Baltimore name. And I just remember being very, very jealous as he told me about all these locations he'd kind of driven through, and went down to the docks, saw the digs that Valchek arranges for people. So I mean, it's quite relevant to our current point in the show. So yeah, very, very jealous. But yeah, that's cool.
And being from Baltimore, Damon shares a couple more in-depth tidbits about it, which is nice because to get a native view, as it were. And he says, an interesting factoid, the pit beef scene where Weebay, Savino, Stinkum and D'Angelo eat in Season 1 is a little place on Pulaski Highway called Chap's Pit Beef, and they're known as one of the top 2 places for pit beef in Maryland. It's actually a very small place right outside in the parking lot of the Gentleman's Gold Club, the strip club they visit in Season 2. And it clarifies not the first one where they're inside and Perez gets nervous, which he says he once worked at as a DJ, which is interesting.
That's cool. Okay, so we have a nice geographic link there that you'd have never known about unless you had some insider information, so that's pretty cool. Although I'm not sure I can think of a second strip club in Season 2. Unless he means the brothel, maybe. We might have to ask him to clarify for us. But
It
maybe...
says it's called the Gentleman's Gold Club.
Okay.
So keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, maybe my memory
He
just doesn't serve me correctly.
Perhaps of even greater interest, he goes on to say that he says his dad had a small role in Season 3 and that he was an extra.
Oh, excellent.
So
did you specify the scene?
He didn't say who.
Okay.
So if you want to let us know, then we'll keep an eye out for it once we get to Season 3. But yeah, thanks for your email, Damon and Sean, and send them in, and we'll read them out on the show.
Yeah, of course. Right, I guess is that all we have for our correspondence this week? Hopefully, it might be a regular feature. We don't know. Depends on you guys. But I guess the next stage is to jump into our recap, and we switch back over to Alex this week. So, shall I give it over to you then?
Yeah, might as well get started. And once again, we've got another situation where there's a lot of large sections that we're breaking down in order to make them a little bit more manageable. And the first large section we have is carrying on with the Jane Does. So we'll start with this first one. Bunk and Lester meet with Rules to discuss their progress. Rules tells them that they should have held the ship in the docks and that they are his scapegoats if the investigation is not fruitful. The detectives make their way to the docks anyway and try to get Horseface to tell them more about the container. He hides behind his union representation and refuses to accompany them to their offices. Later, Russell shows them Dolores' bar and they hassle both Horseface and Frank Sobotka. Frank appears terrified of this new attention from law enforcement. And I know that's quite a strange one to start on because it kind of covers from the very beginning of the episode to the end of the episode, but it's like 3 separate parts. But that's just how they're spaced out in the show, I guess.
Yeah. It's very much focused on this kind of Jane Doe's investigation, isn't it, for the first few episodes. So it makes sense to kind of condense it into one big thing and we'll tackle it as it goes. So I guess we start with that Rules and... is it Rules and Jimmy? They have an encounter.
It's Rules, Bunk and Lester.
That's right. I think there's that scene slightly earlier where he bumps into Jimmy in the corridor for the first time since firing him or demoting him, and the look on Rules' face where he genuinely can't believe he has the cheek to show his face in the department. I thought it was pretty good.
Oh, that's like the tiny little bit just before it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. I thought that was a nice little moment where we can see Rules' fury there.
Absolutely, yeah. Fantastically drawn face. But I guess the main event is, of course, when he talks to Lester and Bunk about their progress, a little appraisal.
That's right.
And we see generally that he's just kind of washing his hands of any responsibility and putting it all on the boat that they're failing in this investigation, which we know is very much false because the port is crawling with conspiracy if you look for it. So yeah, it's odd. And it's strange that they probably would have never gone near Frank's crew, these two detectives, if they'd have managed to get the guy on the Atlantic Light. You know, Frank probably would have been safe, never would have been murdered or anything like that. So it's interesting to think about how things change if small little events don't happen, which is another big thing that The Wire makes a big point of.
Yeah, well, we covered that in about all the pieces matter in the first season.
Yeah,
it's kind of well established, that falling domino effect.
Yeah.
Also worth noting in that same scene, I think it's actually before, kind of doing this backwards in a way, it's actually before Brawl sees Jimmy. Jimmy enters the office and he sees that woman who was staring at his backside in an earlier episode. And her name is
back on
Winona.
the arse staring.
He's back on it, yeah.
Yeah,
and
Winona,
he says her name, which is Winona.
Ah, so even a name to her.
We kind of get it there very subtly. She gives a little stare. It's not much. Not as much as it was in the earlier episode.
That would just be treating us too much, wouldn't it, if we got extra good gorp.
And shall I guide us on to the next part of this, where we had the detectives making their way to the docks and they go and see Horseface?
Yes, sure, absolutely.
And we learn about these whistles that they have in order to alert others that the police have arrived.
Which seems really stupid. Isn't that kind of another way of saying, "Hey, police, come arrest me, I did something wrong," or I might be suspicious? It just, I found that a little bit unnecessarily attention drawing.
It does seem like a tacit admission of guilt.
Yeah, it's like, I understand that it's kind of like maybe a brotherhood thing that they're trying to go for, that they have this kind of set pattern or tradition of whistling when the popo are around, but from a logical standpoint, it just seems really stupid, particularly since they do have things to hide. You really wouldn't want to start whistling like when these guys show up.
But aside from the kind of like, reasons why they might be doing it, what it does do is sort of show this entrenched us versus them mentality that we had from the street in the first season, and now we're seeing it in the docks as well. It's showing the police as this kind of like, obviously they're not sort of working with communities in the way that one might expect police to. There is this established, or at least they're not able to, because there's this established sort of war going on, and it's stemmed around this war on drugs, which is kind of a war on the people in that sense, and The Wire's trying to hammer that home, and that's one of the ways that it's doing it. I think they've sort of entrenched those lines of, those battle lines being drawn. The enemy are here, that's basically what they're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that reflects badly mostly on the police or the history of the policing rather than the history of the docks. So, yeah, that's definitely a good point.
And we find out about all this union strength that they've got, which does seem to be the only union strength they have, which is the fact that they have all these union representation, the lawyers, and they seem to know their rights. So they're trying to, you can see why Horseface is trying to exercise the power that the dock does have, because otherwise, in the grand scheme of things, they're a lot weaker. Hence why Frank Zabotka is so desperate.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. And Bunk doesn't fetch him, does he? Horse stands his ground very, very valiantly.
Yeah. And then the last part we had for that is where we see Bunk and Lester for the last time in the episode, where they go to Dolores's bar, and that's where they hassle them again. Just to try and, it's just sort of basic intimidation.
Bunk was certainly nailing it with all the cigar smoke and sort of vacant stares.
It's interesting that thus far we've seen all these kind of moments of brilliance from Bunk and Lester. We've kind of seen that they're both excellent detectives, and yet in this episode they achieve nothing and get sort of bollocked right at the start, and they kind of don't have any moments of brilliance.
That is true, yeah. Yeah, definitely. They don't even get their slam dunk with Frank, although Frank nearly cracks under the pressure, doesn't he? I think he escapes the toilet just in time before he goes into his panic attack, which is pretty troubling to watch. I love the way they harked back to the good old honest days with those kind of pictures in the toilet, black and white.
It really is. It's Frank looking in the mirror to see what he has become.
Yeah.
It is quite a classic dramatic moment, but it's executed very nicely here, and the performance is obviously stellar as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And you just sort of feel the pride bleeding through those old pictures, don't you? And sort of Frank lamenting what's happened to the docks, but it had to happen. They were desperate times. So yeah, it's a very, very kind of quite cliffhangery ending, really, because that's the last scene of the episode, right? We've kind of come to the end at the start, almost. Yeah.
It's a very strange section, this one.
Definitely.
Perhaps we should hastily move on to the next one.
Sure.
So, still with the Jane Does, we have Jimmy McNulty continues to try to identify this girl. He uses the photo he matched to the girl he pulled from the harbour to identify her clothes in the evidence. He discovers a letter amongst them and has a foreign national translate it for him. He learns the girl's first name and a little about her family. Just a small little arc we have going through this episode with Jimmy.
Yeah, so it's kind of a second investigation episode, and Jimmy certainly makes more progress here than Bunk and Lester do. I guess we're kind of continuing to see Jimmy's boredom more than anything. I think he just kind of comes to the homicide department for chats and to make rules feel uncomfortable and look for little pieces of evidence to work through this case that doesn't really matter in kind of the macro sense, but I guess from a personal point of view, it's certainly an important thing for Jimmy at this point, an important pursuit. So it's quite nice to see him working through that and trying to occupy himself.
And to see Jimmy working, because in quite a few instances in this episode, we see him just kind of in his sort of bare apartment in his boxers, just lazing around.
Yeah, they really lay on thickly kind of the the tragedy of Jimmy's life in that scene, don't they? With all the mounting phone messages and the kind of barren walls and mattress and Guinness bottles and the rest of it. Yeah, it's a pretty broken portrait of Jimmy. And I guess we see they kind of mirror that with Beadie as well. Then they talk about her hole in her life and the kind of her background. But so that's getting onto another section. Yeah. I guess there's that bit where McNulty goes to question the kind of, is it Russian or Polish lady? I assume he went to one of the local Polish churches, perhaps, and questioned some lady out in the kitchen. It's not really explained how he ended up in that situation, but it's certainly a useful lead for him.
Yeah, it's a little bit of magic, isn't it? Suddenly he's in this place, and I think wherever he is, we only see it once. This is kind of like a single trip away. And like you say, it's not explained how he ends up there, but I guess it's for the purposes of his story. And given the fact that he is in quite a, desperate position as far as trying to find out who this girl or any of these girls are, I guess the show is, narratively throwing him a bone here. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, she turns out to be completely unhelpful, unfortunately, because all she manages to tell him is that there's lots of Father Vasils and lots of Saint Vladimir churches, I think. But at least it's certainly a good thing to try.
So yeah, that's pretty much it for the Jane Does on Whole.
Are we including the bit about McNulty and Elena, or will that come a bit later?
Okay, well, we'll do it now then.
I guess it's just a case of he received the papers, the separation papers last episode, didn't he? And he's now filled them in, although that was kind of preceded by a big, this is not in my favour statement, to try and, I guess, grab a bit of leverage to try and get them back together. And it looks like it may have worked by the look on Elena's face, but we won't find out until a bit later.
Yeah, he's making a little bit of a scene, I guess.
Yeah.
Making a little bit of a thing out of it, because that's what he wants. He reveals that he wants to just get back together, and I don't know, giving the game away a little bit, but we see how that carries on anyway. I mean, it doesn't. Elena's basically trying to get as much as she can out of it, and she's doing a good job of it.
Yeah, and it makes sense that he's doing this now as well, because now that he's stopped having so much work to focus on, he can realise that his life, beyond work, is pretty bare and empty. And Elena is, at the moment, his best opportunity to fix that if he can reconcile with her. So it makes sense that this is kind of a natural thing for him to do at this point in the story.
The sparse interactions between him and Elena really do hammer home the kind of lack of family man in Jimmy.
Yeah.
The fact that it is so rare to see in the show, it just, that's dead on.
Yeah. And you sense that McNulty's always threatened by the security that Elena's kind of home life for the kids brings him. He just can't offer that at all by the way he lives his life, so he kind of knows he's doomed.
So should we move on to the Sobotka detail section?
Yeah, sure.
And the first part of that is we have Burrell meeting with Cedric Daniels, and he offers him the command of the detail to stay with the department. Daniels realises that Valchek has asked for him by name. seeing an opportunity, he demands a promotion, his own major case unit if the investigation is successful, and the chance to pick his own people. And we have a really, really nice return to the Burrell v. Daniels
Meeting of the Fates,
from season 1. And we see that Daniels is kind of pretty experienced at the kind of politics with Burrell now. He has a bit more flow to him. He knows how to bounce back. And it's the fact that the opening shot, you kind of see it reveals Burrell's and tracks across the office to reveal Daniels, and it's like showdown, you know.
Yeah.
It has quite a exciting cinematic feel to it.
Yeah, it's good. It has a lot more weight to it this time, as the history is so established with those two now. And we see that this time it's Daniels with all the power, which is a very new situation, because Burrell always, you really felt like he was, you know, at the end of Daniels' strings, and Burrell's now having to make the allowances, and using the leverage in Daniels' favour. So I guess we also get the first reference to the major cases unit here, which will eventually be set up, sorry for any first-time watchers, and that becomes a very important part of the show, almost the heart of the show, so it's good that we kind of get the first mention of that. And it's the only thing that's kind of motivating Daniels to carry on in the police department almost, is that he wants something real that he can work with, and if he can set up a major cases unit that he runs, I guess he's kind of got that. So.
And also trying to dig in a little more with his principles and stay in this job to get done what he wants to get done, which ultimately, as we'll find out in greater detail later on, you know, it really sets in motion the failure of his relationship with Marla.
Yeah.
But we come to sort of relationship issues later on.
Yeah, and I guess we can also mention that this is the second time that Daniels has been in the, I guess he calls it the corral, doesn't he? The horse stable, as Burrell and Daniels kind of trade horses. Sorry, no, as Burrell and Valchek trade horses, because the first time was when Prez cold-cocked the kid, and Burrell and Valchek needed Daniels to take one for the company. And as we heard back then, and as we hear now, Valchek is kind of a necessary evil that they need to appease in all situations. So there's a lot of kind of parallels back with that early episode, really. It's kind of going through things again, almost.
So yeah, nice showdown.
Yeah.
Nice to come back to it. I said that we've been covering relationship issues, so here we go. The next part is Daniel's meeting with Greg's, and he persuades her to join the detail despite Cheryl's desire for her to work a desk job. Cheryl and Kima's differences are brought to the fore when they are stuck behind a car of drunk adolescents, and Kima cannot fight her impulse to arrest one of them. Daniels and Marla also have different outlooks on the detail's merits, and she storms out of dinner after he tells her about it. Kima gets the same reaction from Cheryl.
Yeah, they really laid on thick the parallels here, didn't they, with the relationships?
Yeah, I think maybe it was a little. You know, the main bit here is that that strange section where we see it panning across the table, and we see the two couples. You know, Marla and Cedric, and Kima and Cheryl, and it's sort of moving across them as if they're almost all sat at the same table.
Yeah.
And we see these kind of looking up to one another, and there's that same music going on in the background. And it's like this classical music, almost trying to denote like high class. I guess it's trying to sort of say that the home lives, which is dominated, well, not necessarily dominated, but this kind of life of security and stasis is based mainly around Cheryl and Marla, and that this sort of classical music, this high class thing, is that they have greater aspirations to have this security, and that's another part of that parallel. But again, there's also the parallel between the two couples themselves. And I think, although the visual style that it used in this scene was interesting, it was maybe a little bit too on the nose, so it wasn't very subtle.
Yeah, definitely. There was, as you say, something quite kind of upper middle class about those scenes.
There to be taken very quickly.
It's quite rare. It's a montage scene technically, isn't it? Really, it's very rare. Not so much in the first and second seasons, but I think this is one of, you know, beyond season 2. There's not really any experimental scenes. It's played very, very much for very straight. So again, it's interesting to see The Wire playing with things like that and drawing those parallels, if a little bit thickly. as you mentioned. I thought it was quite interesting that Daniels was just kind of sat there watching Crufts as well. I might have said that might be the last program we want to put on, but I don't know what the symbolism was intended there, if there was any.
It's quite strange as well. It's like a sort of fake Crufts as well. Like, it has this kind of... It sounds like someone trying to do a British accent to like do an impression of the people at Crufts.
Well, it was a Blackpool-based Crufts session by the sounds of it. Yeah, I haven't seen that in years, but yeah, it's a very British show. I'm not sure if our American friends will be aware of it. I'm sure some of them might be. But
would Daniels watch Crufts? I mean, that just... I don't know.
No, it's odd. I guess they're perhaps making a point that he's the dog on the end of the department's leash, or that he's jumping over the department's hoops or something like that. But I guess, yeah, it was just a bit of an odd choice. And then Marla comes and gives him a little hug and brings him to bed. So for the moment, they're still happy.
Yeah. And then there's the great scene where Kima kind of can't contain herself, and there's those guys like being drunk and everything by that car, and she goes and has a sort of badass moment, if you like. Yeah.
Cheryl trying to get Greggs to fight her instincts and think like a lawyer is what she said, isn't it? Like, and that's kind of what
not
she
Levy,
wants this relationship to be. Yeah, not quite Levy. I think he's superhuman, practically. But this is consistent because we heard McNulty mention... Oh no, Daniels mentioned that she was studying pre-law, and we sensed that Cheryl was really pushing her down a paper trail path. And she gives in again, and takes the rough kind of street policing, the thrill of it, by storm. Another indicator that they're just not cut out for one another. So I thought that was quite a nice character moment for both of them. Having said that, what the hell were the frat boys doing? I guess frat boys will be frat boys, but seems like a very convenient situation to demonstrate Greg's and Cheryl's frictions. But yeah, it was just kind of sat on a car.
It was kind of
traffic jam.
Typical loutish males being slightly sexist and crude, and it's just like, I don't know, it was a bit of a basic scene, I guess, in that sense. Like, here's a bunch of obnoxious individuals that, for the purposes of the, the narrative, are just going to be faceless, pawns in our in showing off our parallels, showing off our relationship trouble.
Yeah, they're clearly pretty heartless if they are going to hold up an entire busy road down Baltimore. But there we go. Kima and Cheryl got caught up in it.
But no, it's nice. It's quite a fun scene, I guess.
Yeah, it's unusual for The Wire, isn't it? Anything that's kind of away from the professional, and it's always interesting to see those scenes that are a bit more down to earth.
And that's pretty much it for that section. So I'll move swiftly on. Colonel Rules allows Daniels to take all of his choices except for McNulty, whom he refuses to let off the boat. Daniels later meets with Valchek, and he explains his premise for the investigation and drives him to the facility. Herc and Greggs accompany them, and are reunited with Prez, and Valchek offers anyone from the southeastern to Daniels, and Herc reminds him that Carver is now there.
So, I guess we get the first bit where Daniels comes in to see Valchek, welcome to the southeast sort of thing. That's just after Valchek has received his second photo, of course, where we see the van has made it to New Orleans, much to Valchek's frustration. Mm-hmm. And then we have our big intro of the Major Cases guys, our favourites.
Yeah, this is the detail reassembling, and it's interesting that the detail is about to start. Like, we're 4 episodes in, and the detail is about to start. And I think this time in season 1, the detail had at least made like a little bit of progress. Like, the detail was established quite early on, so it shows kind of the style of The Wire in its storytelling, that even, a modest amount into the season, it's only just getting its kind of main detail, as it were, its main kind of police unit that we're following. It's only just getting it started.
Yeah, absolutely. And they take a couple more episodes to really set things up anyway as well. I don't believe they really start working or doing police work or street police work until about episode 7. So it really is a slow start this season. And but it kind of feels all the more satisfying for it, because we've had so much set up at the docks that both sides of the tug of war, you really feel like you can understand both of them and become equally attached to them. So it's done well in that respect. And I guess our detail is pending people like Lester, Carver, as Herc alluded to, McNulty, who it makes sense isn't there, Sidner, who just is for some reason absent in season 2, unexplained, and I guess Santangelo, who would run a mile if he was ever asked to go on the detail again. So we can see some changes up in the way they're doing it. They're getting rid of some of their deadwood. And McNulty.
And Prez must have been very satisfied with his "where have you all been" or "what took you." Can't remember exactly what he says now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because he's been in the detail for a good couple of weeks at this point, hasn't he? He got the VIP access firsthand. And I thought it was pretty kind of a bit of a slam dunk when Rules reminds Daniels that he climbed out of the basement because 2 Polacks were pissing on each other's leg. It's kind of just a way to put a bit of a downer on the work that Daniels is about to do. So, yeah, it was pretty nice kind of mixture of emotions with the reassembling of the detail.
No doubt a lot of the members of the detail, even when in season 1, they obviously may have had an idealistic notion of what they were doing and that they were kind of finally putting good policing on the map and that people were going to sit up and take notice of what they were doing. But like you say, it's very sobering when he gets reminded, and Daniels gets reminded that it is, like you say, just a feud between 2 Polacks, and that's why we're getting it started. Without that, there would be not necessarily any other reason. It would just be business as usual.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that was quite an important thing that Rules through in there. Horrible, of course, but an important point to make.
So our next big section, we're going to move on to Omar. And this one's mainly I'm just going to cover pretty much everything in this one part. So McNulty is still getting pressure from Bunk and Eileen Nathan to find Omar as a witness for the Bird trial. He spends a day cruising the West Baltimore streets, but the best he can come up with is Bubbles and Johnny shoplifting. He tells them that they must pay a tax, which is find Omar for him. Bubbles and Johnny later get high and ask around about Omar. Kimmy, one of Omar's new crew, is in the same place asking about their next target, and overhears Bubbles' inquiries. Omar catches up with Bubbles on the street as he steals scrap metal. So just the whole thing to do with our Omar there. And starting off with a scene that we mentioned earlier as well, which is the despair of McNulty's apartment and his many, many missed messages.
Yeah, of course, with Eileen Nathan. Yeah, that was good. Guess it was a little bit more cheerful to see him cruising the projects for any signs of Omar, because as we remember, he was very, very prideful about not revealing to Bunk that he had no idea where Omar was, and now we see him getting a little bit desperate and finding more things for himself to do, I guess. And I guess there's not many characters in the world where you could literally roam the district of a city and expect to find him, but with someone like Omar, it's pretty understandable that he's kind of known to everyone.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's sort of a needle in a haystack. I mean, McNulty knows it as well, but he is just kind of driving around aimlessly. He even stops and asks just these kind of random corner boys, doesn't he? He's like, you know where Omar is? And again, we see the sort of us versus them. He's just like, fuck you, officer.
Yeah.
We're not even going to even give you time of day,
Yeah, absolutely. I do enjoy those scenes. I particularly love the way McNulty just completely kind of rejects the traditional policing as well, kind of dismissing the dropping of the drugs as littering and saying, I don't care about possession charges, just give me Omar. It's just a really kind of refreshing way to look at policing, and I'm sure the corner boys were completely stunned by it as well. So
they don't seem to, though. I mean, I was literally about to say the opposite. That doesn't seem to fool them at all. They just don't react. They're just like, you're bullshitting us. Go away. Because they must have had plenty of other sort of ruses in order to catch them in the past. That's why they've become so resistant in one way, I would imagine.
Yeah. I thought they just perhaps were playing a bit of a poker face, but...
Yeah, all that. I mean, it's hard to tell because it's kind of very much behind what we see, but...
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? But I guess there's a number of ways to interpret it. And what else do we do on his search? He finds eventually
Well, we find
Bubbles and Johnny. That's it, happening by them, having a little chat about taxation.
Because this is the first time we see Bubbles in season 2.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, yeah, it's quite an absence for this guy. Nice to see him back.
Because the last time we saw him, he had just failed at getting clean, and he was going back into it. And McNulty had obviously given him that money.
That's right, yeah. And it was perhaps a bit coincidental that he found him just by driving around, I'm sure. But it makes sense, I guess. Bubbles roams the streets. That's kind of how it works. And he tails the bus to the supermarket, and then very conveniently catches them stealing stuff, giving him instant leverage to force him into a goose chase on Omar. So that was quite a nice trail of events.
Yeah, it's... I don't think... it's funny how they have these Bubbles and Johnny scenes, and I think Johnny barely says anything in the whole episode.
No.
He's either just stumbling around with Bubbles, or there's he sort of mutters a couple of things when they're getting high, but he is very much just like a sidekick in this episode. It really kind of hammers that home.
Because there's that one scene towards the end where Johnny is reciting some ridiculous story about someone who gave birth to a mute baby and then started having a period or something like that. It sounded ridiculous. And then Bubs just kind of stops him in his tracks and says, "Look, here's some money we can make off a abandoned radiator." So it's just kind of, he is just out of his mind on drugs, I guess, and just doesn't really kind of take note of the world around him.
Yeah, he's in a completely different reality.
Yeah.
And then we see Kimmy again. She's kind of hears about the old conversation, and again, without any real kind of explanation of how he gets there, how he finds them, or if Kimmy just went straight to him, or what happened. Omar shows up whilst they're trying to steal scrap metal, and has again another one of his sort of moments, the Omar moment, where he turns up, cocks his shotgun, and says something menacing.
Yeah, I thought it was quite an interesting plot, really, because obviously they were fairly subtle with the way Kimmy had tipped off Omar about Bubs, and they just happened to come across Kimmy in, I think, is it Bubbles' dad's? Is it Bubbles' dad they go and speak to, or something like that, or just some old wise man in the ghetto? But he advises them to stand out on a corner with a big ass package, which probably would have worked knowing Omar and knowing the coincidences that occur in the ghetto. So, but yeah, it's Kimmy's in there, and the show doesn't really draw attention to it. She's the lady who can blow ridiculous kind of snaky smoke out of her into her nostrils.
Yeah, there's quite a few lingering shots of her doing that while she's listening.
Yeah, it's quite impressive, really. It looks very evil. So they kind of nail her. But yeah, I guess then Omar's tipped off and goes looking for him.
Yeah.
So this plot is kind of just a bunch of chance encounters in many ways, but it certainly gets to McNulty Omar in the end.
And that's about it for Omar. We kind of close off with that scene, and he says something like, "You've been looking for me," and then it's kind of left on a cliffhanger, really. But I don't think at no point, I don't think maybe it doesn't need to be said, but I don't think at any point you feel like there's much danger for Bubbles, because why would Omar shoot them?
No. He's got nothing to steal.
He's not going to kill them because they're, we know Omar doesn't just blindly shoot people. So it's interesting that he does kind of threaten them with the shotgun. It's just there as almost like a prop.
Yeah. It's just Omar needs to be Omar, and he's not an Omar without his prop. So definitely. And I guess he calls him Snitching Bubs, which makes the point that Omar snitches too. So I guess they do have something in common, and he's not exactly against Bubs by any means, which is why he went to find him, I guess. I guess it's worth mentioning just at the end as well that a nice little Easter egg almost is that McNulty gives Bubs his headphones to Elena by the looks of things, because she's listening to...
Oh yes, I forgot about that, yeah.
She's listening to them as she kind of puts the dishes away, which is another nice little subtle drop.
Yeah.
Passing the taxation on to her. So he's just as bad as Bubs.
See, McNulty does bring gifts home for his wife, but they're stolen headphones. Not a pair of flowers or anything kind of cliched like that. Stolen headphones. That's what.
While he's wearing police uniform. Yeah.
If you want to save your marriage, that's how you do it, I guess.
Yeah.
Although
Right.
she seems quite pleased with the gift.
Yeah, she was very happy. She was bouncing
Because I
around.
use them at the gym.
Maybe that's what sealed the deal for him. Maybe they're getting back together.
So leaving Omar behind, let's move on to what's going on at the prison. And our first part, we have the aftermath of the deaths from Tillman's bad package, and it sparks an investigation in the prison. Officer Reynolds suggests that they will likely get informants if they offer to shave years from prisoners' sentences. Avon tries to convince D'Angelo to use the situation to their advantage and reduce their sentences. D'Angelo refuses to believe that Avon had nothing to do with the deaths of the inmates and tells his uncle that he no longer wants anything to do with his business. So straight after our hot shots.
Yeah. I guess we get the line, if you can't win the war on drugs in a prison, where are you going to win it? And that kind of is the impetus.
Yeah, we kind of get these polemics from The Wire every now and again, don't they? They're kind of the core messages that they want to communicate on more than just a entertainment level. They want to be educational. They want to kind of show some kind of ideals or something about the state of the world. And this is another one of those moments where we have the prison wardens and prison officers saying that you can't even win the war on drugs in prison.
Yeah. And it's that statement that makes it very credible that they do let Avon off the hook, because, you know, it's the lesser of two evils in this case. They're talking about a massive issue that, you know, is putting the reputation of the prison at risk, putting them in a weak position. So you can almost see Avon and Levy sitting above the room, kind of putting the strings here, can't you? Writing each person's line as they say it. Just everything falling into Avon's favour as he expected. So it's kind of great for a first-time watch as you see what the hotshots have done for Avon, because I don't think they made it very clear at all. Or if you hadn't seen it coming, it's quite a nice kind of eye-opening moment. And yeah, so I thought it was a great scene.
And there's like there's some attorney that they're talking to in a meeting about it as well. I think Officer Reynolds is talking to him then, and even he acknowledges, he says something about you go after the case you can win or something like that.
Yeah.
Go after the case that you can make rather than trying to, because they even say that they reckon that it was, you know, that it might have been planted there themselves, or but you know, it would be far more effort for them to actually chase the real details. They're just going to shave the sentences, even if they have the slightest inkling that Avon may have been involved. You know, like you say, they're going for that element of saving face, saving themselves.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And they also mention here that they're only doing this because so many of them died, and it was because more than 5 people died. And if there weren't so many, they might have just, you know, dismissed it as a bit of a one-off. But I guess we get a sense that luck played into it more than we might have thought, and that there needed to be at least a certain kind of level of urgency to the situation for it to actually work for Avon.
And so we, just bringing us back to our little section here, we have Avon scheming, and in a way, it's, you know, it's pretty smart of him to take advantage of this, because not only does he get his business done with Tillman, gets him kind of sorted in terms of no longer being a problem, and he also is going to get some years of his sentence, quite a lot of years actually.
Yeah, it's the ultimate two birds with one stone. You almost forget about the whole Weebay element to it, but yeah, it's kind of the very first thing we see of Tillman. And
there's that scene where, you know, as we mentioned, D'Angelo, you know, he knows that Avon was involved with the bad package, and he doesn't want to be associated with them anymore. And that scene highlights their differences, where we have Avon's kind of pragmatics, and he's trying to take advantage. He's an opportunist. He's really kind of grabbing everything that he can. And D'Angelo is more principled and
conscience, isn't he?
He's got a lot of guilt weighing him down, I guess. Avon has, like, all of those little incidences that we have in season 1, especially involving Wallace and Poot and Bodie and down in the pit. Avon either doesn't even really know or care about any of that stuff, whereas it must still weigh very heavily on D'Angelo.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big kind of deterrent if it does play on your mind.
And And that's why Avon has that perspective. That's why he's trying to go for those advantages, because he does have that bird's eye view on his organisation. You know, D'Angelo's position is a lot more sort of macro.
Yeah, and we get the sense here that this is the final straw for D'Angelo, and that he really is completely severing the ties at this point, because I think he goes. They live in the other ends of the prison anyway, don't they? But he really wants nothing more to do with him. And we get a sense of how when he says that he's freer in jail than he is at home, he is, because he can escape Avon here. Out in the pit, he's always subservient to Avon.
Yeah, that's very true.
And over here, Avon has sway, but he's still ultimately at the mercy of the COs. Therefore, D'Angelo can have his space if he wants it.
D'Angelo kind of has choices here.
Yeah.
When he was out on the street, he kind of, he did his job, and like you say, he was very much shackled by the Barksdale organisation and his uncle. But here he can kind of be himself. He can be an island in a way. He doesn't have to be associated with anyone, and we do see that he's not exactly socialising.
No, absolutely. But you also sense that that's also his downfall. If he had stuck with Avon, Stringer would have got wind of that and may not have arranged the hit. So it's all kind of a big web of.
And he doesn't have
problems.
anyone to protect him. He really is alone.
Yeah. That island kind of falls. Yeah.
So let's move on to the next part of our prison section. And we have Avon working with Levy, his attorney, to negotiate a reduction of his time until his first parole hearing to 1 year in exchange for information about the deaths. Despite the investigators' suspicion that Avon was directly involved, they agree to his deal. Once the deal is in place, he informs on Tillman, and the investigators discover the narcotics that Stringer had planted in Tillman's car.
Yeah, a welcome reappearance for Levy. Pulling strings with massive sly efficiency, practically threatening the prison into giving Avon a short term, with the possibility of more overdoses on the way, which seems pretty extreme. And he's only getting better at what he does. He's unbelievably efficient. A fantastic character.
And again, this is the first appearance of Levy in season 2, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of people returning now.
Yeah, and in quick succession, because this is just after the bit where we see Bubbles for the first time.
Yeah.
As the episode goes. So we're kind of quickly reintroduced.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's always nice to have Levy back, because he's just the guy you love to hate.
Definitely. And I think this is perhaps one of his most skillful ever cases, the way he deals with Avon in this negotiation. It's absolutely fantastic. And he kind of conducts the meetings in such an efficient manner. It's clear that the whole thing with the hot shots was premeditated. Like he's arranged every line on the page. Since they've threatened them with more ODs, there's nothing the COs can do but play along with it, even though they all know it's crap, which is great as well. That they all, even one of them mentions 5 will get you 10. Avon spiked it, but there's nothing they can do. So, yeah. It's a very well constructed set of scenes.
And Stringer again. There is that scene where they put on the TV to show that news report afterwards, right? To kind of confirm what happened with Tillman and the prison.
Yeah, the kind of news is on by chance cliche. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It's another one of those moments, and it's the one sort of common TV cliche that even The Wire don't manage to get away from, and it does it quite a few times across the show. And they have this moment where, someone turns the TV on, and it's always at just the right moment as the news comes on and the story starts.
Absolutely. And it is odd. It's quite jarring, actually, isn't it? Yeah, but it's cool. It makes sense, and I like the way that it does dwell on Stringer's face for a long time, and you try and read what he's thinking, and I guess he's contemplating the possibility that they may want to look into this further, and it may trace back to Butchie or him. And I thought a lot about the Frank scene in the toilets at the end. It mirrors quite closely that sense of worry or anxiety over investigation.
I guess that idea follows up nicely from the previous episodes where as we talked about, there were characters making a lot of big moves. We're taking those hot shots, like I said. They're trying to make that comparison. In fact, they're taking these risky moves, and in this episode, we see a lot of characters feeling the heat from those moves.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's kind of the consequences all riding up together. And there's a few things we don't see. We don't see, Tillman getting the drugs or whatever, or we don't see Shamrock planting the drugs. We wanted to see him getting subtle with it, but being subtle with it.
Yeah, that's all we know. He's asked to be subtle, which you think would be a given when you're planting drugs in the car of a prison officer, but there we go.
Laid back and shit.
So should we move on to the next main section?
Almost. There's just one thing I was going to mention. The show kind of skips over the aftermath with Tillman. Like, particularly what became of his relationship with Butchie. You'd have thought that as soon as he catches on to the fact that the drugs he brought in were completely spiked. Yeah, I mean, he's not an important character, of course, but it would be interesting to see kind of how his relationship changes with Butchie and the prison in general.
Yeah, that is very much just the end of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just... forget about that. So the next big section we have is sort of focused around mainly Nick and his money troubles. So the first part is actually the opening scene. And we have Nick meeting with his uncle Frank at the harbour at his behest. Frank knows that Nick stole the truckload of cameras, and he demands that Nick return them, but Nick can't because they have already been fenced. So it's quite a short one, just covering that first scene, which is really, really nice. We see more of Frank's, passion towards the docks and towards the port, and the fact that he is smart enough to know what's going on. Like he's not totally blind, even if he is trying to rise up the ranks. He still has a eye for the details in his place, and obviously Horseface saw them, as we see in the previous episode. He saw them taking that truck away with the container on it.
Yeah,
it's quite a very atmospheric scene. Feels very wide open, especially with all those big shots of the port and everything sort of blurred into the background as they're talking.
Yeah, they're really kind of going for that twisted love letter to Baltimore thing, aren't they? With it's kind of, are you meant to appreciate the beauty of it, or kind of recoil at the bleakness of it? Because it's quite a kind of bleak morning, isn't it? Grey and industrial, but
yeah.
The bridge is still pretty vast and impressive, and you can tell Frank adores this. That this is kind of his sunset beach scene for him almost. And Nick really doesn't find anything about it nice. He calls it fucking picturesque, ironically. Kind of grew up in the wrong generation to appreciate this, perhaps.
That's about it for that scene, really.
Yeah, more or less. I think it's nice that they give us a bit of economic geography kind of background to the docks, why they're in such a desperate situation, and how they need to do everything they can to protect the dock's last selling points. Like, since it's kind of really far up the Chesapeake Bay, so he was talking about cities further down, like Norfolk and Hampton Roads, which are right near the Atlantic at the bottom of the bay, and you don't have to travel nearly as far. It's like 200 miles less far to come and offload your cargo there. So what's the point in coming up to Baltimore, up the bay? It's the efficiency, kind of the scale, the proximity to I-95 perhaps, but they're kind of running out of selling points, and Nick's just getting in the way with these cameras here, and he's making a big point about it. Yeah.
Although it's funny how when Frank approaches Nick about the cameras, he kind of gives him a very stern telling to. But they do have quite a conversation about it. And then when later on he sees Ziggy, and obviously we'll cover this later on, but when he sees him, the first thing he does is just hit him. He's basically just like, you're an idiot, yeah. And that's the end of it. He's much, much nicer to his nephew than he is to his son.
Yeah, that is true.
Treats him more like an adult.
Definitely, yeah. And, it's just strange, isn't it? I guess he's constantly got reasons to be disappointed in Ziggy, but who's to blame for them? I guess we can't really say.
Well, let's meet up with Ziggy in our next part, where we have Nick delivering Ziggy's share to him at Dolores' bar. He warns him not to flash the money around and lets Ziggy know that his father knows that they stole the truck. Nick then spends the night with Amy. The next day, Ziggy is seen with a $2,000 leather coat. So I just do that short one to begin with because there's a couple of bits there.
Yeah, I absolutely adore the scene with the camera in the bar. And you get to see like the different skill sets of Nick and Ziggy. Nick kind of almost being a technophobe, not willing to understand the camera, the digital camera, doesn't want to. We see it later when Ziggy tries to teach him how to use the internet for basic kind of searches. And it's a bit odd because we kind of feel that if pointed in the right direction, Ziggy actually is better equipped for the world than Nick is in many ways, particularly for the technological world. And well, right until he goes and takes a picture of his dick in the middle of the bar, I guess. Yeah, I thought
he's prepared for the world of technology, but maybe not sort of just civilized being.
Absolutely ridiculous. But it was nice to see how the cameras were kind of like quite meaningful as a steal. They're kind of, I guess, a metaphor for the death of work and the fact that the photo mark guy loses his job over the digital camera. It's kind of a microcosm of what's happening at the docks and elsewhere, which is a really nice way of summing it up.
Well, one of the main sort of themes it's also making here, you've already kind of covered it, but we have things becoming obsolete. These digital cameras, they're making film obsolete, and like you say, someone working at like a photo mart or whatever it is, they're losing their job as well. And that's covered in a sort of minor manner here. But in season 5, it's like a massive part of it because we have the newspaper, and that's all about it being made obsolete and the fact that this new technology is sweeping it aside.
Yeah.
And it's sweeping aside all the people associated with it at the same time.
Absolutely. So I thought that was one of the nicest kind of subtle metaphors that The Wire makes, really. So I was a big fan of that scene. I guess we then have Ziggy's most ridiculous of purchases, the $2,000 Italian leather jacket.
Yeah. Well, just before that, we do have Nick spending the night with Amy, and there is that very kind of, I guess it's kind of that humorous moment where we have Amy topless, and he kind of like cops a feel, as it were, and says they were staring right at me, which I think is just a very, taking advantage of that HBO position.
Yeah, didn't have enough boobs quite. They've had a big vacuum of boobs for the last 4 episodes or whatever, so they had to show something.
Did they? They had to show something.
Well, I don't know what HBO is like, but if Game of Thrones is anything to go by.
Yeah, maybe they have a kind of charter, rather than sort of having levels where it's, you can't have this many, otherwise it's inappropriate or be banned by the FCC or whatever it is that governs it. They have a minimum, and like, you cannot commission a show on the HBO unless, at least 4 instances of boobs, enough violence.
You certainly get that sense, don't you, with a lot of the shows on HBO. There's some, Game of Thrones is obviously kind of the king. Boardwalk Empire's up there as well. True Blood.
Game of Thrones is actually
It's pornographic, isn't it?
A bit sad, like a bit laughable. Like,
yeah.
So you're just doing this. There's no reason for this now. You're just being you're just doing it for the sake of it because you can. You're just being a bit crass. Like,
you're just showing off. That's all you're doing, Game of Thrones. Although I do enjoy it.
Well, obviously in that way you enjoy it, but sometimes when they're just doing it for the sake of it, you're like, if there are better ways for me to access this kind of material. to put it politely. So yeah, moving on from HBO's love of breasts, let's hit up the $2,000 coat that we have in Ziggy, and obviously this is just completely ridiculous.
So I guess there's kind of
not listened to his cousin one bit.
I guess there's kind of 2 ways to look at it. There's like is he just the ultimate attention seeker? Does he want to be caught? Does he just want to feel like he's living the dream, the American dream, or at least want people to see that he's living the American dream? Like flashing the cash at the bar certainly suggests that he just wants to show off, really. So it's a crazy number of things going on in that guy's head.
We'll continue on with more Ziggy action in our next part, where we have him and Nick meeting with Gleekas, and he asks them to acquire chemicals for him. Ziggy takes the list to Johnny 50, who's their connection in the Checkers, and he points them to a contact in another area. Ziggy is accosted by Maui whilst there, who is another checker, as he leaves, who castigates him for stealing from the docks. Ziggy later gets his revenge by littering Maui's computer terminal with photographs of his genitals, presumably all taken in the bar, I don't really know. And Frank catches up with his son and cuffs him on the head and sends him home. I
guess the cameras planted a seed in the Greeks' operation to start stealing some of the manufactured chemicals from the docks.
And a seed in Nick's mind as well, knowing that there's real money to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also sense that he's very torn, though. He doesn't want to get caught in the criminal world, which he will if he carries on. But having a hell of a lot of use for the money, and he hasn't kind of, justified. Well, he's given an awful lot of justification for why he needs this money. He's got pressure from all sides, from his girlfriend, from just his general livelihood. So, just more money troubles for Nick, I guess, at the end of the day.
And it's interesting to kind of think what they might be using for these chemicals. We had that scene before with Spiros where he's saying, you don't want to know what's in these cans or, and what we want with them. And we have Gleekas asking for all these chemicals. Like, you shudder to think what they're doing with them.
Mm. Yeah, I guess it kind of... you've assumed it would be drugs to begin with, but you never know. Maybe bombs. But something bad and criminal. I guess with this scene, they're also really hammering home the point that in many cases criminality is not a choice, but kind of a necessity. And Nick's being excluded from society with the lack of work, and this is kind of his way out more than anything else.
Yeah. So then they go on to the Checkers, and we see Johnny 50 again. And they have to go to another checker somewhere. And on Ziggy's way out, he gets accosted by Maui, and this is kind of the beginning of a small feud between the two of them. And we've never seen Maui before, but all of a sudden he's established as someone who really, really doesn't like Ziggy, which has kind of been coming for a little while, hasn't it? Like, we have this really obnoxious character, and although he is that way, thus far everyone around him has kind of tolerated it, but Maui does not tolerate it.
Absolutely. It's he really did deserve that coffee on the leather, didn't he?
Yeah, it was a bit of a slap in the face, that one. I mean,
it would be, and it's so clearly non-accidental. It was a real kind of feud starter, and I do unfortunately have to say Ziggy wins with his dick in the computer.
Yes, it was. I don't know what he was doing, but he was kind of really hammering away at the keyboard and mouse. He's doing that kind of TV and film computer use where they just hammer lots of buttons to do simple tasks. Like, he was only changing his wallpaper background, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, he's a real techno whiz, so he needs to do it the ultimate way. But yeah, it was. I guess he had.
Maybe he was like saving the thumbnail of every folder to that picture as well.
Yeah, just his homepage is just kind of Ziggy's dick. So, but yeah, I guess he had to upload the picture though, so there must have been a fair bit of clicking involved with that. Cloud computing hadn't quite made it to the scene yet. He knows his keyboard shortcuts, so. Yeah, that's it.
And then at the very end, we have the scene that we mentioned earlier with Frank catching up with Ziggy, and he doesn't have the same kind of conversation that he had with Nick. He just belts him one and tells him to get lost.
So cheese. Yeah. Yeah, just kind of makes sense, I guess. Not the best way of dealing with it, I guess, in hindsight for Frank, but that's just the relationship they have.
Well, it's hard for Ziggy to kind of really develop that much if everyone around him, including his own father, is just going to continue to treat him like a child. Because I don't know exactly how old Ziggy is meant to be, but I think we can assume that he's at least kind of an adult. So, but everyone around him,
wouldn't you, really? But yeah, it's true. He is just kind of completely battered around.
But then on the other hand, he really is kind of a bit of an irritant. So.
Yeah,
it's hard not to sympathise with both sides.
And you can say that each side formed the other side as well, probably. So,
We're getting very zen there, Toby.
Yeah. But, it's kind of there's no big, Ziggy was perhaps ruined by Frank or the other way around. We don't really know. Yeah, I guess we get the bit with Nick lying to Amy about the back pay as well, and boldly trying to go and buy property.
That is our next little part.
Oh, excellent.
So, as you say, Nick tells Amy that he has come into some back pay and suggests that they look to buy a property in the neighbourhood. He also talks to his mother, having had a successful day's employment at the docks, and goes to bring his father home for dinner. His father retired from the shipyards when they closed, and now spends much of his time drinking at the local pub and theoretically betting on horses.
Yeah, because does he bet on horses?
He kind of looks at it's about the horse racing, but he doesn't actually place any bets. He only jots down what his bets would be in a book. That's kind of what I worked out that it was.
Okay.
So he watches the horse races and places imaginary bets and jots them all down and notes them. And he says that he was something like $4,000 or $7,000 up, but he hadn't actually made that money because he hadn't actually placed any bets.
Okay.
I think that's what it is. I mean, someone wants to email in and tell me that I'm being ridiculous, then please do.
No, I'm sure you are. Yeah, it must have been done very subtly. I didn't really notice that at all. Yeah, I think I was just thinking about the fact that Louis and is it Louis Sobotka and Frank were brothers. I was just wondering what the relationship was like. I think when we see a new character,
Louis shows up a couple of times, doesn't he? In a couple of important events, but we don't kind of see him on his own or in any kind of general sense. This is the first introduction that we have, and we establish that he is a bit somewhat distant, and he just kind of drinks and has his horses.
Yeah, I think he's there to be disappointed when Herc and Carver find Nick's heroin stash. I seem to remember him popping up then as well.
Yeah.
But he's not a major character, but I guess he's kind of Nick's cynical kind of father figure.
I think Frank gets an earful from him at one point as well.
Yeah. They do have a kind of a dinner together, kind of a drinking session together. I'm not sure what they talk about, but I'm sure Frank chastises him for not for taking enough initiative with the union and for kind of being disillusioned with it and not fighting for it. Which makes sense.
And like we say, we have the bit with Nick in his back pay, and he just kind of, obviously he's not going to come clean. He wants to go for that stability. He wants to play the game to some extent there, so he's not going to tell her the truth. Just gives her the back pay story, and suddenly they're able to buy a house. Yeah,
and it seems like quite a hard thing to do with such a small amount of cash, but it certainly makes sense that they're covered if the smuggling money he's getting is going to stop, which, it's not a very stable form of income, so it makes sense to buy rather than rent and then get screwed over later on. Yeah. And
that's kind of it, really. I mean, we have that little scene with him and his family and his daughter, and him and Amy seem a little bit happier in this episode.
Yeah, there's a bit where he picks his daughter up and kind of gets her to recite the names of the ships.
With the child's face carefully masked out of shot so that they didn't have to do any lip dubbing.
Oh, yes, of course. Clever. Maybe she was a killer actress. Maybe it was all her. But yeah, you kind of get the sense that he's perhaps preparing her for a future that he wants her to have, but that she'll probably have no relevance for or know nothing about later on, if the docks are dying as they say they are. And
she knows the names of the ships.
Yeah, so she's on the way to it. This is a kind of links into a flaw with season 2 that not our friend, that there's actually a good Wire podcast done by the TV critic, who went through and did, I think he did an episode for each season of The Wire, but one of his major flaws of season 2 he found was that he could never see why Ziggy and Nick and others were never pushed down different paths away from the docks. And it is a flaw that you couldn't really see past. And you have to wonder if you guess it's all they know. Either he's showing his daughter how the docks works, and particularly when we see Ziggy's familiarity with technology, Ziggy's got potential to go elsewhere in the world and make a living from things that are a bit more relevant to society. Not sure he's got the people skills to pass the interview for it, but and this is the scene that perhaps addresses that point most directly, I think.
Well, now that you mention it, it kind of reminds me. I mean, we're talking about parallels. I mean, in a way, it's similar to D'Angelo's story in the fact that they grow up in these families, and the families are based around a particular job, and that doesn't change. That's it. They're in that job track now, and we kind of see other members within that organisation who have potential, but are still kind of stuck. So we have Ziggy, like you say, he's kind of technologically motivated, so he has potential there. Then we have, say, Wallace, who's like smart and he's kind of good with kids. He kind of seems like he could almost be like a social worker or a community worker or something. And so we kind of see the fact that people have these potentials, and we have this parallel between Nick and D'Angelo where they're kind of in that family job track, and they're kind of stuck there. And maybe that's why. Maybe they're just trying to hit home with one of those parallels.
Yeah, definitely kind of trapped in the institution. I guess there's less of a reason for Ziggy and Nick to be trapped, because they do at least have some financial standing, that that they have at least a stable house and the ability to go up and drive around the city and find new opportunities for themselves. They're not kind of constricted to this really harsh kind of ghetto environment like Wallace was. But again, I guess it's kind of a mindset that you only know what you know. You can't look beyond your world almost. So it's a tricky situation.
Yeah. So that's that kind of covers it for Nick's money troubles and kind of the bit around Nick and his family. So we can move on to our next section, which is also our final section for the recap, which is talking about the Barksdale organisation. And we have Stringer Bell meeting with Cherry, who is the manager of his cut house. And they discuss the poor quality of their latest package from Atlanta, and Stringer orders Cherry to dilute it regardless. This is a very small little section. So it's very short, like a 30-second scene or something.
Just the one scene, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to note that things are not going too well for the Barksdale organisation outside the show. I mean, we've not seen too much about how things are running. We've seen that Stringer is very much in charge, and we've seen a lot of money on tables being counted by people, but in terms of their product and in terms of sort of the future of their business, especially that's how Stringer sees it, they're in a bit of a tight spot, which ends up, leading them towards the co-op.
Yeah, definitely. This is something that they'll expand on a lot in the next few episodes, won't they? Once Prop Joe becomes involved again, I cannot wait. But yeah, I guess this is the point where they realise that their only source of product now is pretty weak, and they're having to step on it as it is to sell it off at a profit. It's a bit of a dire situation for them now that Roberto's off the scene. Yeah.
So, is there any other bits in the episode you want to cover? Anything we haven't covered yet? Just the episode in general?
No, I think everything was included there. Don't think we missed off anything.
The one thing that I was going to bring up that I actually forgot to mention when we covered it is when we have the scenes between Bunk, Lester, and Beadie, we do get a little bit of background on Beadie Russell that we haven't really had so far. We haven't had much of kind of where she's come from, what she's been doing. And we obviously know that she's got involved in this case and she's a bit out of her depth and she's not really like police. And we also learn that even though she got involved with the the Port Authority and all that, she didn't really have much of a desire to do it. She doesn't have that kind of burning desire to get these things done in the same way that all of the other police do.
Mm.
Although slowly she does develop into, she gets better. She does improve.
Definitely, yeah.
But she's just in it for the money. She just has that kind of chat with them about wages and what she needed if she was going to support her family, and that was just all that it was about. It's just about having these needs and fulfilling them, and they were purely kind of socio-economically based.
Yeah, and she said that her husband ran away to Phoenix, and hasn't heard from him since in 3 years. So you kind of get a kind of perhaps a McNulty sense of emptiness in her life, and that's something that eventually draws them together.
Yeah, that's true. They kind of have that in common. There is a feel of aimlessness that they can kind of come together on.
Yeah. I guess it's worth mentioning as well that we haven't really seen anything of Bodhi, have we? Or Bodhi was an important. We haven't seen him since his trip to Philadelphia in episode 1.
That's true. Yeah.
Or Poot, and the Barksdale has been very much focused on this kind of macroeconomic side of it, where Stringer's doing all the arranging of the products. So that's our one other omission. But yeah, that's it for our recap.
Shit, Lieutenant, I promised.
You think my little woman's gonna give a great big cheer when she hears about it? I was out the damn door.
You don't know Cheryl.
You don't know Marla. Look, if you want, I could use you inside like we did Prez last year.
If I hear the music, I'm gonna dance.
So let's move on to our final sections, and first I think we'll talk about our favourite scenes. So did you have any particularly favoured scenes in this episode?
Yeah, as always, very difficult. I think I'm going to have to go for the scenes with Levy and Avon in the prison negotiations. Levy at his absolute best, absolutely pulling all the stops out of the bag, and nailing Avon's release. And it's quite a fantastically eye-opening moment the first time you watch this and see how the Tillman Hotshots plan has been hatched over a few episodes is really going to pay off for Avon big time in a very clever way. I also kind of think the digital camera discussion in Dolores' bar is very unique and an excellent kind of symbolic scene for the show in general.
Yeah, nice. I enjoyed the Burrell and Daniels scene in the office where Daniels is getting a bit of leverage, just because it's a nice callback to season 1, but in very different circumstances, and both of them in very different positions of power. Especially with Burrell, we know that he's about to head upstairs, as he puts it.
Yeah.
And I also, I did really like the scene with Kima and Cheryl, where we have Kima, getting out of the car. She's not going to back down. She's not going to think like a lawyer. She's going to think like police. And as she says, as we have for our epigraph, which we'll cover in a bit, she says, if I hear the music, I'm going to dance. And we definitely see that here.
Yeah, that's pretty much her kind of living it out, isn't it? Yeah. What about building on from this, your favourite character this episode?
Given the strength of the first and final scenes, it's got to be Frank Sobotka, because it's a really good opening and a really good exit for this episode, and there's 2 scenes with Frank Sobotka really kind of we really see his passion and his anxiety, and he has this real turmoil about his job and the docks, and we really do kind of see a bit of a range here. And that opening scene, like you say, it is quite grand and almost like this anti-love letter to the city. And then at the very end, he really tries to keep it together when he comes under this new pressure from the police, and he almost has like a breakdown in the toilet. And I thought it was really, really wonderfully acted.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It really lingers on that final kind of panic attack, doesn't it? I was very nearly going to put him down as mine. I went with Levy, I think. We've seen a lot of Levy, but I don't think he's ever been kind of prominent enough to become our favourite for the episode. So I decided to give him his moment, considering what he sorted out for Avon in this situation. Yeah, for me, Levy.
Chris Bauer, the guy who plays Frank, he's a very, very good actor, it seems, so I'm surprised I haven't really seen him in anything else that I can think of. I seem to recall seeing him in maybe The Office, because our housemate loves The Office, and I think I recall seeing him in that.
Yeah, I think he's the sort of character who pops along for little cameo sections in TV shows, really, just kind of side characters from what I've seen. I've never seen him in anything major at all, but he's got a fantastic range by the looks of it.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody has got any more good Chris Bauer performances from film or TV, then do let us know. And we'll move on to our title reference. And obviously this episode is called Hard Cases. What did you think of this title, Toby?
Yeah, and it's not a bad title. It kind of mirrors episode 4 of season 1, which was Old Cases. Not sure if that was intentional.
I didn't spot that. That's I feel like that's not a coincidence.
Yeah, it definitely feels like they're trying to say something there. So in this case, the hard cases, it could be a number of things. Could be about the case of the dead girls being a very difficult case. It could be about the port guys being hard to get to cooperate. They're kind of hard cases. It could be about finding Omar being a difficult, insurmountable task. I think it's just a lot of difficulty for characters, I guess, is the key thing to take away from it, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of... Did try to see if there was any other kind of items or objects that could be... have connotations as being a hard case, but you're right, I think that's pretty much it. It's just kind of the difficulty of the situations that people are facing, and particularly in terms of the actual cases, the police cases, because as we see very early on, Bunk and Lester got their hands full with the Jane Does. Yep,
and it's not exactly a whodunit, as we see with Rawls' meeting. It's a stone cold whodunit. I'll take it back. It's not a dunker. There we go. It's dunkers versus whodunits. That's how the murder cases work, from what I understand of the BPD. And then we have our epigraph from Greg's that I mentioned earlier. If I hear the music, I'm gonna dance. And she's pretty much making a statement about the fact that she is entrenched in that work that she really loves. Like, she's not gonna. It's not going to take more than someone just asking her to stop. And the stability of the kind of life that her partner wants to lead is not going to entice her. And it's the same with Daniels. She kind of shares that moment with Daniels. And she also says, I'll tell your wife if you tell mine. So those two really, really bond over that idea. The fact that nothing of that style is really going to entice them away from what they really want to do, which is be police. It's certainly quite an obvious epigraph. There's not much subtext to it. And it's very Greg specific, and maybe Daniel specific as well with the linkage. But yeah, overall, like last week, not the best of epigraphs, but certainly a good way to bring Greg's back into it, because she's been a bit absent recently. Yeah, well, we've shared some quite sort of serious moments with Greg, so I don't think it's unreasonable to try and use her as I say use her, I mean in a kind of narrative sense. Yeah. Okay, so that closes up our final sections. It does indeed, yeah. So thanks for joining us again. Unless there's anything you kind of want to throw out there before we finish up. No, I think it's very pretty heavy episode, really. Covered a lot of ground, so happy to call it a day there. We were very efficient. Like you say, there was a lot to get done in that episode. And it's only going to get the recap, and it was like there's quite a lot there, but I think we managed to wade our way through it. Yeah. But yeah, more to come, as Toby says, and we will be back with episode 5 next week, as usual, and you can send us in any emails you like into caughtonthewire@gmail.com, and check out our website at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. And until next week, enjoy yourselves. See you later. What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore? Baltimore. What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore?